Well, it's been a quiet week in Lake Wobegon, Minnesota, my hometown, out on the edge of the prairie. It has been unnaturally warm out there, and that has gotten the raccoons thinking that this is the breeding season, so we have male raccoons running around looking for females with sex on their minds, which is just a huge nuisance, as it was for other people when you and I had the same thing on our minds, and thank goodness it's them and not us. It just raccoons are just crazy. They're just crazy, and they don't have the Christian upbringing that would make them sneaky, and they're just out there cruising and screeching at each other. So everybody was glad when the temperature finally fell a little bit, and they recovered their senses, and they went off. It's confusing. So many people taking the Sunday off from church last week. Some of them were down with the flu, and other people just suffered from lethargy, which is common when the weather gets warm. We know this is true. When you wake up in the morning and it's 20 below zero, you feel excited by it. You get out of bed and your feet touch the floor, which is like ice, and your clutch is engaged right then and there, and you start thinking complicated thoughts and start to have ambition. I don't know what people do when it's warm in the morning. I've forgotten. We have summer here, don't we? I think so. We used to, anyway. Monday was Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and so it was a day off from school. There was a young girl out on the skating rink who had a boombox she'd put down on the ice, and it was playing Ravel's Bolero, a girl with long, dark, brown hair and long legs and white figure skates, and she was doing amazing spins and leaps, and people pulled over in their cars, and they got out, and they stood on the shore watching her, and when she saw there were people watching her, she did even higher leaps and more complicated spins and figures, so you knew from that she was not from Lake Wobegon. Lake Wobegon people are not show people. They can do amazing things in solitude, but as soon as there are people watching, they lose their balance. But of course, you know that already, so why am I telling you that? Even though it got warm, the last of the snowbirds headed south, some to Florida, some to Arizona, and we were happy for that because retired people and hardworking, stressed-out people don't coexist very well. They just don't. You run into retired people, and they have to tell you how happy and busy they are, and they can talk about that for 2 hours. And meanwhile, you're thinking about work, and you're thinking about your car and your house and home repair, and you're thinking about all of the things that you've told people you would do that now you see you cannot do, and how are you ever going to get out of this? And here's this person sitting across from you, slowly savoring their coffee and talking about joy, for heaven's sake. I mean, it's like two different, it's like Buddhists and Methodists or something. They just don't go together. Two worlds colliding. We were very happy to see Senator Kay Torvaldsen, the oldest man in town, 95, we think maybe 96, left. Finally, what a handful that man is. He was okay as long as Esther was alive. The two of them fought for 50-some years, and that was the cause of equilibrium in their lives. And then she died, and he just became this sour and embittered man. He was terrible with his daughter Mary, who takes care of his house and his business and everything. He's just been so mean to her. So everybody just is very happy when he leaves town. His nephew Donald came up from Florida to drive the old black Chrysler down, and so we wouldn't worry about the man killing somebody on his way south. He told us that the old man has found this Pentecostal Baptist church down in Florida. He's been an indifferent Lutheran, but he found this Pentecostal Baptist church where the elders demonstrate their faith by drinking rat poison in front of the others. They drink a whole glass of strychnine, and they survive this, and it makes them ecstatic, and they're dancing around with their hands up in the air, and they sing joyful hymns of praise to the Lord. And these Baptists persuaded old man Thorvaldsen last winter to drink of the strychnine, and it turned out to be single malt scotch. And this was a church that made him very, very happy. Lutheran church full of all of these solemn do-gooders, who are out to save the world. And here was a church of happy hypocrites who believe the world is just about to end. So, hey, live it up. Let's have a good time. Donald is a man we remember in Lake Wobegon. He was a tackle on the old Lake Wobegon Leonard's football teams of 57, 58, and 59, losing teams all 3 seasons. You see him now and you think, if he had weighed this much back then, we would have had an offensive line. But he met his old teammates down at the sidetrack tap, and they got into the bourbon and the beer, and then the champagne, and then the peppermint brandy, to give themselves more interesting hangovers. And they talked about their old coach, Orville, who wept when he did his pep talk before every Leonard's game. He told the same story, telling them that if you believe you can win, you have the strength of 10 people. And always illustrated this with a story of the man who had a flat tire, and he jacked up the car, and the car fell on him, and his wife grabbed the front fender, and she lifted this car off. This little woman lifted the car off and saved his life. And Orville always wept as he told this story, and the team was moved. And none of them ever stopped to think back then, why do you get under a car to change a tire? It doesn't make sense, does it? And then they would go out on the field to play big teams, big fast teams, and the car fell on them, and nobody lifted it off, and then the whistle blew, and then somebody drove the car away, and Donald got drunk along with the rest of them, and he stood up, he made a speech, and he said, boys, he said, I look back on my life at the age of 72, and I see that the things that I got to choose, my wives, my work, where I lived, mostly I chose wrong. But the things I was given and could not choose, my grandkids, my hometown, my old friends, are what make me really happy. And here's to you. They were all embarrassed, of course, but they knew that he meant it. But if he does, why is he living in Florida? We're not sure. The next morning, he was nursing a terrible headache, and he got into the black Chrysler and discovered a couple miles down the road that he was sitting in the shotgun seat, and a 95-year-old man was driving the car. And he was going 55 and then 60 and then 65 on winding county roads heading south. This short, old man with very little vision to even read a newspaper was driving 70 miles an hour, and he was looking out through the steering wheel over the dashboard in a little sliver of windshield between the top of the steering wheel and the dashboard. And now he was going 75, and he was on the freeway, and he was passing one semi after another, and he had the radio tuned to a Christian station, and they were playing a gospel quartet singing about how the Lord looks after us, and we don't need to worry about anything and let the others go their own way, because the Lord watches everything that we do. And what was he going to do now? Donald was not sure at all. He tried to think of how to pray for deliverance from a man who is in the Lord's hands. How do you deal with that? It's a diplomatic problem. Anyway, it would have to be his problem, and life goes on in our town, much quieter now that the retired people are gone. The ice fishing goes on. The ice is about 20 inches thick, more than thick enough, and the old crowd is down at the cafe, and Darlene is there, ready to welcome you, whether to listen to your sorrows or to have a little witty repartee back and forth, either one, your choice. Down at the Bon Marché, they're sitting under the hairdryers, and they're talking about whoever fixed the meatballs at the church supper were just absolutely terrible. That Marilyn made them, and you know she did not make those herself. She bought those at some delicatessen somewhere, and that tolerant girl who read the scripture last Sunday in church, she could not understand one single word she said. What are they doing in schools to educate our children? And there is a crack in the statue of the unknown Norwegian, and what are we ever going to do about that? That's going to fall on somebody someplace. And who and where is that man that Pastor Liz came with to the New Year's Eve party? And what are we ever going to do? What is this world coming to? That's the news from Lake Wobegon, where all the women are strong, all the men are good looking, and all the children are above average.